For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. The mountains don't care about you. They don't care about your spirit of adventure, your love of fresh air, or desire to see something wild and beautiful. They'll chew up every bit of that and spit it back at you cold and indifferent. You come unprepared, they'll eat you alive. In the wilderness, there's no sympathy, no second chances, no forgiveness. It's raw, sharp, and merciless, and it takes everything you bring to survive. Let's venture back to the savage wilderness, where survival is earned, not given. This is Outdoor Disasters. For Ondrej, Petr, and Pavlina Pižova, their alpine hike would be a debacle. In February 2016, Pavlina, 33, and Ondrej, 27, a Czech couple, came to New Zealand on holiday visas. They worked the apple orchards in Motueka, hands raw and aching, to fund their journey. They aimed to explore the South Island, hoping to land winter work in Queenstown. Peter, a trained snowboard instructor, looked for his chance on the slopes, while Pižova hoped for a job in a bustling kitchen or lodge. They found no luck and grew restless, so they decided to go tramping in the rugged hills around Queenstown before making their next move. They took on a few trails to test themselves, to feel the sting of the alpine wind and the crunch of earth beneath their boots before they settled on the Routeburn Track, a 20-mile or 32-kilometer march to high country at 4,300 feet or 1,300 meters. The Routeburn Track is among New Zealand's great walks, attracting adventurers with promises of breathtaking beauty and alpine majesty. Traversing remote regions of fjordland and mount-aspiring national parks, the track requires trekkers to traverse steep ascents, precarious ridges, and rapid weather changes, especially in winter when temperatures can plunge below freezing. The challenges of snow, poor visibility, and rugged terrain demand that hikers be well prepared and informed about the risks associated with these remote conditions. In winter, Routeburn is particularly treacherous, and many sections are impassable due to snow and ice. This seasonal difficulty increases the risk of hypothermia, frostbite, and disorientation, threats that demand advanced planning and equipment. The New Zealand Department of Conservation describes the hike as the ultimate alpine adventure, taking trampers through ice-carved valleys and below the majestic peaks of the Southern Alps. The department provides shelters along the track. These huts are sparse and often hard to locate in severe weather, making emergency planning crucial. Before setting out, Pavlina and Ondrej stopped by the Department of Conservation office in Queenstown, where a ranger told them to reconsider. The snow was old but treacherous, and the forecast promised trouble. They shrugged off the warning, reasoning that no new snow meant a fair chance. They planned to hike the Routeburn and the Capels Valley Trail toward Glenorchy. Though Ondrej could read a map, neither had real experience in snow-laden mountains. On July 25, 2016, they parked their campervan at Routeburn Road, spending the night there, the track ahead calling them to a wild adventure. The following day, the couple headed off, traveling light for the snowy conditions. They had no crampons, snowshoes, ice axes, or a tent, relying on reaching the hiking huts along the trail. That first night, they stayed alone at the Falls Hut, a small shelter 4 hours up the trail. At 10 the following day, they pushed on, aiming for Harris Saddle. A forecast warned of worsening conditions, but the air seemed steady enough when they began. Then came the snow, thickening around them, each step heavier than the last. What should have been an hour's walk took 5, snow swallowing their path. They were in deep now and reasoned that turning back would be worse. At Harris Saddle, a sign pointed 3 hours onward to Mackenzie Hut. They believed they'd beaten the most challenging stretch, the saddle behind them now. But not long after they left, the storm surged. Snow fell harder, visibility fell with it, and their footing turned treacherous. By 5 that evening, darkness swept in. The wind roared and fog swallowed the world around them. They switched on their headlamps, the light barely cutting a meter through the dense night. Track markers vanished. The ground turned unfamiliar, and they circled in confusion, each step like the last. Exhausted and lost, they had no choice but to huddle by a sheer rock face, their only shelter for the night. With no tent to ward off the cold, They crouched under a thin flap. The night was long, and Pižova sat awake, fearing the snow would bury them if she dared to close her eyes. Despite the bitter night, they woke to a clearing sky and could now see Mackenzie hut was just beyond the snow-covered ridges that had hidden it from them the day before. They decided to make for it immediately, picturing a simple breakfast at the hut, a bit of warmth, a moment of calm. They moved with new energy, buoyed by the prospect of a dry roof and hot food. The marked track twisted toward Lake Mackenzie, steep and choked with snow. To make better time, they chose a shortcut, a decision born out of tired logic and sheer determination. But the terrain had its own tricks. Instead of descending toward the hut, they moved up a valley, drawn higher onto a spur that led nowhere. When they realized their mistake, the clouds had gathered thickly, and a biting wind swept over the mountain. "We'll give it a go another time," Peter muttered, more to himself than to Pižova. They turned back, hoping to retrace their steps. Yet, as the snow swirled around them, all they found were their own scattered footprints, like ghosts leading them in circles. Peter, weary of the weight and frustrated, yanked off his trousers, which had become sodden and heavy, clinging to him like a second skin. Pižova felt the cold digging into her bones, a deep chill that made her clumsy and slow. She could see the color fading from Peter's face, his movements stiff and erratic, though he insisted he was fine. Night was creeping in once more, and they stumbled forward, urging each other on with words that felt thin against the wind. They stopped by a large, overhanging rock to catch their breath. Pižova went ahead a little, searching for any sign of the trail. Peter stayed behind, saying he'd be right along. But when she came back, she found him in a strange state. He had taken off his down jacket, mumbling about how it's all buggered. He seemed warm, too warm, his face flushed even as the temperature plunged. She knew what that meant, knew the danger that warmth brought, hypothermia. But Peter brushed her off, claiming his jacket had become too heavy. They pressed on, still clinging to hope, the hut so close in their minds they could almost see it. Pavlina led, with Ondrej following behind. She looked back once only to find him stopped, staring at the ground, his eyes glazed and distant. She called softly, but his voice when he answered was strange, his words slurred, nearly unintelligible. He bit down on a piece of wood as if to keep himself grounded, yet it only made him seem further gone. He was slipping away from her, and she knew it. Then, without warning, the snow gave way beneath them, and they tumbled down into darkness. The earth seemed to swallow them whole. Pavlina lost her headlamp and a glove in the fall, leaving her disoriented, but she scrambled down to find Ondrej, her hands numb and raw against the frozen ground. He was there, caught between branches and rocks, his backpack wedged tight against his back. He was breathing, but barely. She tried to pull him free, but he was trapped, the weight of his pack pressing him into the branches. His breaths grew shallower, each gasp catching in his throat. She knew he was suffocating and could hear the desperation in each drawn-out breath. But no matter how she tried, she couldn't move him. Fear paralyzed her, dread that moving him further might send them both tumbling into some unseen gorge. She didn't want to push him through. She didn't want to risk it. Slowly, unbearably, his breathing faded. The night swallowed his gasps, and Pavlina was left in silence. In the dark, she found a headlamp in his backpack, her hands trembling as she dug through his things. She checked his pulse, hoping for a beat, a whisper of life. She was alone now. She sat beside him, her strength waning, the cold pressing on her. The wind whistled through the trees, indifferent, as she kept vigil beside him through the endless night, holding on to what little warmth remained. Unable to move Ondrej, Pavlina stayed by him 2 more nights, the cold pressing into her bones as she shivered beside his lifeless form, waiting for something to break the silence. She was alone in a world of snow and stone, and each night grew longer, colder. By the 3rd day, she knew it was her or the mountain. She could stay with him, or she could go. The choice was clear and terrible. Summoning her strength, Pižova ate what little she had left, drank from the icy meltwater nearby, and prepared herself. She pushed on through bush and the broken rubble of an old rock slide. A thick fog rolled in as she climbed, swallowing the ridges and masking her way forward. She lost her gloves somewhere in the snow and could feel the bite of frost as night came down. She huddled beneath an overhanging rock, the night heavy with fresh snow that covered her as she slept, numbing her hands and feet until she could barely feel them. As dawn rose, Pavlina Pižova stumbled onward, searching for the hut she knew must be near. At last, by midday, she saw a faint outline of Mackenzie hut in the valley below. With her last reserves of strength, she clambered over massive boulders around Lake Mackenzie, slipping and falling until one misstep landed her in the freezing water. She dragged herself out, cold to her core but close enough now that nothing would stop her. The hut had food, gas, and firewood. Pižova's numbed fingers had turned white, and her feet swelled drastically when she removed her boots. It was days before she could put them on again. The hut became her sanctuary, her only link to survival. But it was an empty comfort. In those first days, her grief came hard and fast. Ondrej was gone, and all that was left were cold walls and the silence of the alpine peaks pressing in around her. She nursed her frozen fingers and toes, wrapping them in blankets, knowing the hut would be her only hope now. For 24 days, she rationed the scant supplies she'd found, stretching each meal to last just a bit longer, living on barely enough to sustain her body, but determined to survive. She used ashes from a fire to write H for help in the snow, hoping a rescuer would see it. Unable to walk far and with numerous avalanches around the hut, she stayed put. Trying to regain her strength, she exercised outside the hut with a heavy pack. Grief gnawed at her as deeply as the hunger. The nights were brutal, the quiet stretching out until the sound of her own breathing seemed loud, as if the mountains themselves were listening. Each morning she forced herself to move, to check her supplies, to keep her hands and feet warm enough to stave off the creeping frostbite. When her fingers stopped bending, she knew it would only get worse. She heard aircraft pass over the hut a few times, the distant whir of engines a fleeting hope. She waved her jacket, her scarf, anything she could, but they flew on, oblivious to her below. In the long hours of solitude, she tried making gear by turning broken bits and pieces into something that might carry her through the snow to the divide shelter near Teanau. She fashioned makeshift crampons and strapped them on for a test walk, but the gear fell apart on the first few steps, leaving her with nothing but a defeated spirit and the vast whiteness stretching out in every direction. Her heart sank. Even the thought of trekking out seemed impossible now. Pižova was alone. All that remained was waiting, through the long hours and empty nights, waiting for some miracle to find her in the silent grip of the mountains. Pižova's disappearance sparked concern among friends and family when she and Ondrej failed to return on schedule and posted their concerts on Facebook. Vladka Kennet, the consul for the Czech Republic, who lives in Glenorchy, near Queenstown, noticed the post from concerned relatives in Europe. She passed Pižova and Peter's details to the Department of Conservation, and the couple was reported missing. After nearly a month without contact, a rescue operation was launched. Police found the couple's van at the Routeburn car park. The New Zealand authorities initiated a search based on the couple's planned route. A helicopter with searchers on board flew over the track. As it neared Lake Mackenzie, they saw Pižova jumping up and down in a fluorescent vest in front of the hut. On August 26, 2016, rescuers discovered Pavlina Pižova alive in the emergency hut. Weak, frostbitten, and emotionally devastated, she was airlifted to safety. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors stated she was in remarkable condition given the circumstances. Police recovered and search and rescue volunteers Ondrej Petr's body 2 days later on a steep slope 2 kilometers from the hut. A police investigation found the couple had set out on an alpine track in harsh winter conditions, despite encountering multiple warnings regarding weather, terrain, and avalanche risk. They had not carried a locator beacon or informed anyone of their plans. They also lacked the proper equipment for an overnight stay or alpine gear suitable for the conditions, such as snowshoes, a snow shovel, or an ice axe. Mr. Peter's clothing was insufficient for the sub-zero temperatures and snowfall, leading to exhaustion and hypothermia. A report from the New Zealand Mountain Safety Council prepared for the coroner concluded that while hypothermia was the ultimate cause of Peter's death, several alternative decisions could have, almost certainly, led to a safer outcome. The coroner's report noted that the couple lacked the experience and preparation needed to make informed choices about their winter route. Despite being advised against taking the track in winter conditions, they proceeded with their plans. Shortly after, Pavlina would conduct a news conference to address the ordeal, stating, "As you can imagine, the last month was very harrowing for me and my partner's families. There is not enough space, and it is not appropriate at this time to go into details. But I'd like to take this opportunity to just briefly explain our actions. The conditions were extreme. We encountered heavy snowfall and low clouds, which contributed to our enforced overnighting in the open, which affected our plans to reach Lake Mackenzie hut. In our attempt to reach the hut, the tragic accident happened when my partner fell and died. After his death, it took me another 2 nights out in the open before I reached the safety of the hut. The recent heavy snows meant I was walking through waist-deep snow, and because all track markers were covered, I had to find my own way. During this time, I got extremely cold and exhausted, and my feet were frozen. At the hut, considering my physical health, the deep snow conditions, and knowing there were avalanche paths ahead of me, I knew it was best to stay in a safe place. I made a few attempts to walk out from the hut, but my feet, the weather conditions, and the deep snow discouraged me from doing so. At the hut, I saw numerous avalanches coming down. I would like to use this opportunity to pass a strong message on to anyone intending to travel in the New Zealand mountains to seek very good information and mainly respect the winter conditions and quickly changing weather. I am aware we made a few mistakes, not leaving our intentions with somebody, not carrying a PLB, and underestimating the winter conditions on the track. All these aspects contributed to our tragedy. I would like to thank the New Zealand Land Search and Rescue, the local police, and DOC for their effort to bring me to safety. The Routeburn Track remains a popular destination, but Pižova and Peter's story is a cautionary tale. The New Zealand Department of Conservation advises all hikers to carefully evaluate weather conditions, even for the country's well-maintained trails. Pižova's ordeal demonstrates the critical importance of respecting wilderness environments, understanding local conditions, and ensuring that emergency preparations are in place. But her survival was admirable. Instead of succumbing to despair, she remained resilient. At the hut, she made wise choices that contributed to staying alive. Pavlina wrote a letter to the Department of Conservation, thanking them for, in her words, the well-maintained infrastructure that literally saved my life. Thank you, and my apologies for any inconvenience. She also wrote a heartfelt letter to her rescuers, expressing her gratitude for their enormous effort to bring her to safety and return Peter to his family, stating, "Nothing can express how grateful I am that our tragedy happened in this area. With your expertise, I'm overwhelmed by your empathy and gentle support. From the bottom of my heart, Pavlina Pižova." If you go out there without the right gear, without understanding what waits for you, you will not last long in the wilderness. It's the kind of ignorance that gets people killed. The storm doesn't care that you wanted an adventure. The snow doesn't mind if you lose your way. When you freeze to death in the night, the only witness is the wind, which will keep blowing long after you're gone. The wilderness doesn't make exceptions, and it doesn't give warnings. You show up with what you have, and if that isn't enough, you won't be coming back. Needless to say, proper equipment is essential, especially in winter conditions. Alpine hiking demands specialized gear, including thermal clothing, adequate food supplies, and communication devices, which are critical when venturing into the wilderness. Understanding the local climate and terrain is essential for making informed decisions and avoiding dangerous routes. Hikers, trampers, adventurers, or anyone venturing into remote environments should prepare for contingencies by notifying others of their plans and carrying emergency signaling devices. The mountains are older than you, tougher than you, and if you don't have the respect to bring everything you need, they'll leave you out there, another naive adventurer lost to an outdoor disaster. If you've made it this far, please consider clicking those subscribe and like buttons. Want more outdoor disasters content? Check out these videos I believe you'll enjoy. Thank you for watching.